One of the paths to a school leaving certificate is the Cambridge International exam. Joining me in the lounge is Wendy Young, who will give us more information. Wendy, to start off, what is the Cambridge International exam?
So Cambridge is a school system that is used in the UK, and then obviously in a lot of different countries around the world, it was then integrated into their schooling systems, and then I'm not quite sure how long ago it was, but it became part of the homeschooling environment or distance education. I can remember back probably about 15 years ago was the first time that I heard about homeschool students using it as a matric or a school leaving route. In fact, I think you interviewed Megan Murray quite recently, and she was the first person that I heard actually used Cambridge for school leaving. And it's just one of the routes that parents in South Africa can use for their children to kind of top off their home education, but in particular for kids who would like to go to varsity. And you use the International Cambridge books. We obviously have a variety of different choices in terms of subjects, although I don't want to get ahead of what you want to chat about, but it's really just tapping into the British schooling system and using their materials for our children to do school leaving, although you can do it for younger years as well.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, with the GED, they don't require any prior testing or results for you to write. Is the same true with the Cambridge exam?
Yes, yeah. So you look. It depends when you're going to do it. But if you want to start with your grade 12 and your grade 12 year and do the AS levels, you don't have to prove that you've passed the IGCSE, which is your grade 11, and you don't need to have a grade 9 like with CAPS to do grade 10. So you can jump in at any time without any proof of prior learning and do the work if you feel that you have the skills to kind of pick up those textbooks and get going.
Why did your children decide to follow this route?
So of the 4 children, 2 used Cambridge and 2 did the GED. My eldest daughter was obviously our first child facing the decision, and we just felt that it was probably the most direct route for her to go to varsity. She wanted to go and study journalism, and she obviously structured her subjects around that, and it just is the most recognized and most direct way for kids to get access into university. She didn't, however, go to university. She got married at 20 and decided to work for my husband. And then she went to study at college after her husband was finished his architecture degree. But our younger child, our 4th child, also did Cambridge, and that was because he wanted to go into engineering. And Cambridge maths, physics, chemistry, and computer science offers a really good stepping stone into first-year varsity studies. And again, it's recognized quickly and easily by the different varsities around the country. So we didn't want our children to flounder with first-year mathematics or first-year chemistry, physics, whatever. And Cambridge offered that standard of academics for a science degree.
How many subjects do you have to cover, and do you have a wide enough choice?
Definitely. So Jess chose, you have to do mathematics. That's not optional. But she chose history, geography, literature, those sort of more humanities-based subjects. David obviously chose the very scientific ones. But out of that, there is a variety of different ones that you can choose. The catch is making sure that the exam centers near you actually write those exams, because some of them that offer practical subjects don't allow, your art, biology, music. Some of the schools don't actually allow private candidates to write those exams with them. So that would limit your choice. But you can do a variety of different languages, a variety of the different sciences. some of the schools, I know in Natal, they allow kids to do environmental studies. There's actually much more variety than what you would find in CAPS or in GED for kids to make a really good choice and allow them to kind of hone their sort of last 2 years at school or in homeschooling as a preparation for what they're going to study at varsity.
You mentioned schools. So does that mean that your exam center is based at a school?
Yeah. So there are a few options. Obviously, there's the British Embassy used to, I'm not sure if they still do, I'm sure they would though, allow students to write in their facilities. But in general, homeschoolers go and register with a local Cambridge exam centre. And on the Cambridge website, you can go onto the sort of school or examination centre locator and put in your area, and it'll tell you exactly which schools will take private candidates to write their exams there. And then you just write on the same day as the school children do. The important thing to note about registering to write exams at these centres is that they normally require registration 3 months before the exam. So you can't wake up sort of 2 weeks before you want to write and hope for a place. You do need to plan into your year when you're going to make contact with the local schools and make sure they accept your private candidate and that they allow those subjects to be written there, and then you can go from there.
In terms of preparation, how do you prepare for an exam? How much time does it take? Is there an age at which you start?
I think that's one of the beauties of homeschooling is that your kids can determine when they're ready to start preparing for their school leaving. The two that did Cambridge did two completely different things. But when your children are ready to take the reins of their education and have an idea of what they want to do, would be the time to start discussing what those school leaving routes would be. And so my eldest daughter started at 17 and my younger son started at 14. And, that was their unique characters and their choices. They advise that IGCSE, which is your grade 11 equivalent, that the IGCSE is done over 18 months, and the AS, which is your grade 12 equivalent, is done over another 18 months. But that's just a suggestion. It can take a year and a year. In some of my son's subjects, he only took 9 months to complete them and then wrote the exam for that because those were his easy subjects. So it really, again, depends on the child, but it's a process of getting the textbooks that you need for the subjects, looking at the content of the work, breaking it down into doable chunks, giving the kids some downtime and, a bit of holiday time, particularly if they've got school friends and they want to see their school friends during the holidays, and working out how long it's going to take for your children to work through the textbook, taking into account that they probably need about 6 months before they write, 6 weeks before they write the exam, just to do past papers. It's a big part of your exam preparation is downloading the papers, doing them and marking them so that the brain is trained, particularly if you, like us, have come from a very literature-based, no textbooks, hands-on lifestyle of learning, and now you're moving into a very textbook-based matric for your last sort of 2 years. You need to give yourself time to get used to what it is like working with a textbook and sitting for a test, because we didn't do any tests or exams our whole way through homeschooling until we came to Cambridge. So giving 6 weeks before your actual exam to do your test papers and that sort of thing. We try to allocate in non-exam times about an hour a day to each of the subjects. So in IGCSEs, it's advisable to do 7 subjects. And so you're doing about 7 hours a day on your Cambridge work. On a day that you perhaps have a tutor, that would then cater for that hour in the textbook. During exam time, because you can write your exams, it's split between May and June and October and November. So the exams, during exam time, you're focusing more on some subjects than you're focusing on others. And they, particularly when you start with your grade 12 work, you could look at probably doing a good 8 to 10 hours a day of work, depending on what your goal is and what marks you want to get. The engineering faculty is very clear that they're looking for things in the upper 80s. So you need to put in the hours, whereas humanities doesn't have that. They're looking in the 50s. So you might not need to be putting in as much time.
I just want to ask, is there a way that you can repeat a subject if you're not happy with your marks or if you perhaps did not pass?
Yeah, so then they call it a rewrite, and you then do that in the next exam session. You get to do a rewrite of that paper, and it doesn't impact your final statement of results. You just have to make sure that you fit into with your application for varsity and all that sort of thing, that you get it in time. But yeah, you definitely can do a rewrite if you want to. You can also request a remark. So if you kind of sitting like a percentage or two below your required mark that you need to get into varsity or into the faculty that you want to go into, you can request a remark. There is a fee involved. And if your mark goes up, because they perhaps find that there are, more in the text that they can put towards your final mark, then they don't actually charge you. They refund your money if they find it was their error. We had that situation with my son. He was adamant that they had mismarked something in his one physics paper. So we paid the fee. They remarked his paper, and it actually moved him from a B in physics to an A in physics. So, and then they refunded us the money. So that was really, really good news. So there's that option as well. Yeah.
Just touching on cost, it seems that Cambridge can be very expensive or affordable, depending on whether you use a supplier or a tutor or go for it all yourself. So yeah, in general, is it affordable? Do you need to save up for 10 years?
No. Look, it depends. I was confident with my first child to do the majority of the subjects except the maths. I'm terrible with maths, so I got a tutor for maths to help her through that. In fact, it was Megan Murray again. And all the other subjects, I was confident to teach her, the history, the geography, the science, not science, the literature, that sort of thing. So therefore, the cost only was in purchasing the textbooks, which currently are about 400 Rand each, and then paying for the exam fees at the end of the year. That was our only cost for her. And I think that the whole year cost us, including tutors, it was under 20,000 Rand, which may sound quite a bit for some parents. But if you compare that to some of the distance education providers that give you online tutoring and additional work besides just the textbooks, there you can be looking up to 40,000 Rand a year. So it was half cheaper. Things were a little bit more expensive for our son because I don't do the sciences. That's just not my field. So we had to pull in more tutors, but he actually did less subjects. He only did 5 subjects on an IGCSE level and 4 on an AS. So it all balanced off. I think that one of the things that perhaps we can address is that education does cost us something, and education is always an investment in our children's future. So some parents might feel that is too much, but I think that if your children are heading to varsity, it's good to give them that really solid foundation so that when they get to varsity, they're ready. My other children who didn't want to go to university, they wanted to go into the arts and could get into that with the GED, which basically gives you a matric without exemption. It was a much more cost-effective route for them, but that was their path, which is why I'm such a big thing, always make a big thing about tailor-making your children's education, so that I'm happy to do the financial investment of Cambridge because that is their chosen path. but likewise, happy to do the investment into GED because that is the other child's chosen path.
Yeah, and it's also better to spend the money when they're still in school compared to varsity fees if they decide to drop out
Absolutely.
or they don't make it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. Parents often ask, how do they do it on their own? So there's a little buzzword going around, doing Cambridge solo, which is exactly what I did with our kids. And parents can always contact me. I do consultations to help them put together those sort of plans for their children when they're getting ready. In terms of examinations, planning your exams is very important. When you're going to write some in the May and June and some in the October and November, because Afrikaans can only be written at the end of the year. That's also a very important thing for parents to take into consideration. And probably, I think that parents always say, what should I do before I do Cambridge if I'm not starting with Cambridge when they're little? And giving our children a very broad, eclectic education, keeping their maths and their language going layer for layer, year for year, is very important because it means that the transition into maths with Cambridge in grade 10 is easy. But all the other subjects, the fun discretionary stuff, that can be done higgledy-piggledy anytime they want to, that sort of thing, until they kind of get to that grade 10 year. So what we do before Cambridge is not so much an issue of the subject material, it's more about training our kids' characters so that when they get to new exams or, never having sat for an exam, or the content is really heavy and hard, that they've already learned how to do hard things in the home before, whether it's through doing chores or embracing a new learning discipline or whatever. So then the transition into Cambridge is very easy. But besides for that, I don't think that there's much more about Cambridge. I think parents tend to overthink it, and it sounds so impressive, Cambridge University. But it's really a simple process and a practical one at that.
But when you're unfamiliar with something, then it creates fear. So the more you equip yourself with the information, the more confident you become. So I think education to start with is scary, and then as you go along, you find out, but you can master it and face all the different challenges. So for those ready for the school leaving certificate, I thank you for your advice, and we wish them well. They're ready to tackle this.